listeners, ready to pop the cork on some serious wine knowledge.
I'm ready when you are.
You guys send in a ton of material on wine, so we're basically diving headfirst into a cellar full of history here.
Should be fun.
But today, we're not just like swirling and sniffing the basics.
Right.
We're going deep, like full-bodied, age-to-perfection knowledge of wine through the ages.
I like that, age to perfection, because it really is fascinating how intertwined wine is with basically all of human history.
Right. I mean, think about it.
Right.
Religious ceremonies, political deals.
Everyday life for like thousands of years.
Like the drink itself has aged, become like way more complex over time.
Definitely.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, let's rewind way back, like 7,000 BC.
Okay, wow.
Picture the ancient Sumerians, right, experimenting with fermented drinks.
They were like the OG winemakers.
They weren't just trying to quench their thirst. They were discovering this whole process of turning grapes into
Something special.
Exactly.
7,000 BC. That blows my mind.
It's amazing. Right. And they were laying the foundation for what would become, well, what we know and love today.
A global obsession.
You could say that. It shows you how deeply ingrained winemaking is in our history.
Yeah.
From those early Sumerian pioneers, the knowledge spread like wildfire.
So who picked up the torch after them?
Well, think about the Egyptians.
Okay.
They incorporated wine into their rituals, even burial. Like pharaohs were buried with jars of wine.
Wow. So it was more than just a drink to them.
Oh, absolutely. It was spiritual, connected to the divine.
Fascinating.
And that reverence continued with the Greeks. They saw wine as a gift from the gods, a symbol of like fertility, abundance.
They even had a whole god dedicated to wine, right?
Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, freedom.
Okay. Dionysus, the OG party animal.
Haha, right. But beyond the parties, the Greeks were really important for advancing viticulture.
Viticulture. That's the
The science of grape growing. They were really meticulous about it, choosing the right vineyard spot, experimenting with different grapes.
so they set the stage for the winemaking we know today.
You could say that. And speaking of sophisticated winemaking,
You're gonna say the rum.
got it. They took things to a whole new level.
How so?
They spread viticulture across their empire, like Gaul, Hispania.
So we can thank them for some of our favorite wine regions today.
Pretty much. Plus, they developed sophisticated systems for like transporting and storing wine, to ensure its quality.
Ah, so they had that figured out already.
They did. Those amphorae, those clay vessels.
I've seen those in museums.
Exact. A testament to how dedicated they were to keeping wine good.
It's amazing how each civilization built on the knowledge that came before it. Right?
It really is.
Okay, but I gotta ask about something else.
Yeah.
Sparkling wine.
Yeah.
Like champagne.
It has such an interesting story. While the exact origins are debated,
It's shrouded in mystery.
kind of, but we do know that by the 17th century, monks in the Champagne region of France,
Those monks were always up to something.
they were making sparkling wine.
So that's where it all began.
You could say that. And of course, we can't forget Dom Perignon.
Wasn't he the one who said, "Come quickly, I am drinking the star"?
That's the story. Might not be his exact words, but Dom Perignon was definitely a visionary. He refined the techniques for making sparkling wine, focused on the grapes, blending that secondary fermentation.
The one that creates the bubble.
The bubble.
So we have some innovative monks to thank for our bubbling.
I do.
It's wild how winemaking is both an art and a science.
Absolutely. Which brings us to something pretty central to understanding wine, terroir.
Okay, terroir. Fancy word, but what does it actually mean?
Think of it this way. You got two artists, both incredibly talented, using the same paints, same brushes, but they're painting. They turn out different, right? Because they're inspired by different things. The landscape, the light, the atmosphere.
Okay, I'm following.
Terroir is kind of like that. It's the idea that a wine gets its unique character from its environment. The soil, climate, topography of the vineyard.
So like a wine's fingerprint, a record of where it's from.
Precisely. And that explains why, say, a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa tastes different than one from Bordeaux.
Even though it's the same grape.
Exactly. Terroir gives the wine personality, influences its aroma, flavor, even how it feels in your mouth.
Wow, that's cool.
And that's part of why there's so much diversity in the world of wine.
And then you've got all the different grape varieties on top of that. I read there are over 6,000.
It's a lot. Each grape brings its own thing to the table, influenced by its genes, how it interacts with the environment.
Like a Cabernet Sauvignon is going to be totally different from a Pinot Noir.
Two sides of the same coin, but completely different expressions.
So grape variety sets the stage, terroir directs the performance.
I like that.
But then there's the winemaker, right?
Oh, absolutely. They play a crucial role at every step, deciding when to harvest, what fermentation techniques to use, how to age the wine.
It's a dance between nature and human skill.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual winemaking process itself. How do grapes become wine?
Well, it all starts with the harvest.
Seems pretty straightforward.
It is, but it's also a crucial moment. Winemakers got to assess the grape's ripeness, looking for that perfect balance of Sugar, acidity, flavor.
So not just picking them when they look good.
Not just that, it's a balancing act. Weather, soil, the style of wine they want, it all plays a role.
Makes sense.
Once the grapes are harvested, they're crushed to get that juice out.
Juicy.
Right. And then comes the fermentation. That's where yeast gets involved, transforming the sugar into alcohol.
Ah, the magic of fermenting.
Right. And then some wines are aged in oak barrels.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Classic technique. Gives the wine flavors like vanilla, spice, toast.
Fancy. But I've also heard of some other less traditional methods.
You have. Some winemakers use clay amphorae, concrete eggs, even stainless steel.
Wow.
Each material interacts with the wine differently, changing its texture, aroma, how it ages.
Winemakers are getting pretty...
They are. And that innovative spirit extends to another big thing these days, sustainable winemaking.
Oh, yeah. Sustainable. Definitely want to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a big movement driven by, well, I think people are more aware of how wine production impacts the environment, and they want wines that are, delicious, A&D, ethically produced.
Makes sense. So what does sustainable winemaking actually involve? It seems like a pretty broad term.
You're right, it covers a lot. But the main idea is to minimize the environmental impact, like from the vineyard all the way to the bottle.
Like thinking about every step of the process.
Exactly. And you'll hear terms like organic, biodynamic, natural.
Yeah, I've seen those on labels, but honestly, I'm not always sure what they mean.
Yeah, it can be confusing. So organic winemaking focuses on not using synthetic stuff, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer. It's about working with nature, promoting biodiversity, keeping the soil healthy.
So like organic produce, but for grapes.
Exact. And then you've got biodynamic winemaking, which takes a more, I guess you could say, holistic or even spiritual approach.
Okay, interesting.
They see the vineyard as like a self-sustaining ecosystem.
Yeah.
They use specific preparations made from herbs, minerals, even animal manure.
To help the soil and the vine.
Exactly. There's definitely a philosophy behind it, emphasizing how everything's connected.
It's like they're tapping into the energy of the earth to make wine.
It's kind of like that. And then there's natural winemaking, which is all about minimal intervention.
So if organic is about what you don't use, and biodynamic is about working with nature, is natural about letting nature do its thing completely?
It's more like guiding nature gently, letting the grapes express themselves without too much interference.
I like that.
So natural winemakers typically use native yeasts, avoid additives, minimize filtration.
And what does that do to the wine?
It makes them, well, they're often described as raw, unfiltered, very expressive of their terroir.
So for the adventurous drinker.
You could say that. Natural wines can be a bit unpredictable, which is why they've sparked some debate in the industry.
I can imagine. Some people love that unpredictability. Others might want something more consistent.
Exactly. But it's cool to see these different approaches evolving side by side, adding to the richness of the wine world.
It shows that winemaking is always changing, right? Shaped by tradition, innovation.
And our understanding of how we impact the planet. But before we get lost in the vineyard, let's talk about something practical. Wine label.
Yes, those labels can be so intimidating. All those terms and classifications, it's like a secret code.
I know, right? But don't worry, decoding those labels is actually easier than you think.
Hopefully.
Think of it like a treasure map leading you to the perfect bottle. Once you understand the code, you can make better choices, wines that you'll actually enjoy.
Okay, so what are the key things to look for? What clues should I be searching for on the label?
First, look for the producer or the importer. This tells you who made the wine or who brought it into your country.
It's like knowing the artist behind a painting.
Exactly. Then there's the region, often called the appellation.
Okay, so that tells you where the grape's from.
Right, and that gives you insight into the climate, the soil, the wine's birthplace. It shapes its character.
So a wine from Burgundy is going to be different from a wine from Napa.
Even if they're both, say, Chardonnay, because the terroir is different. And speaking of grapes, that's another key element on the label.
Sometimes it just says, like, Red Table wine. What does that even mean?
Usually that means it's a blend of different grapes. Sometimes the label will tell you the blend, like a Bordeaux blend.
Makes sense.
Other times it's a bit of a mystery, which can be fun too.
A little bit of an adventure. So the grape variety gives you a clue about the flavor, but they're always surprising.
You got it. And then there's the vintage. That's the year the grapes were harvested.
Ah, the vintage. Some are better than others, right?
Right. A warm, sunny year might produce riper, fuller-bodied wine. A cooler year may be a lighter, more acidic wine. Each vintage is unique.
So like a snapshot of that particular year.
Exactly. And then many labels will also have information about the winemaking process or the producer's philosophy.
Like what?
You might see estate bottled, meaning the grapes were grown and the wine was made on the same property. Or unoaked, which means, no oak barrels.
Okay, so it's like getting a peek behind the curtain, seeing how the wine was made.
Exactly. The more familiar you get with these label elements, the less intimidating it becomes. It's all about finding those clues that tell you if it's a wine you'll like.
I like that. Okay, so We've talked a lot about wine's European root, but what about Asia? It seems like there's a whole other side to wine history there.
There is. Europe might be considered the birthplace of wine, but evidence suggests that winemaking was happening in Asia thousands of years ago too.
Really? Fill me in.
One cool discovery is from Jiahu in China, dating back to 7000 BC.
Whoa, that's ancient.
They found jars with remnants of a fermented drink made from grapes, rice, and honey.
7000 BC. That's around the same time as those Sumerian experiments we talked about.
It is, and it shows that winemaking wasn't just a Western thing.
So cool.
And then, as trade routes expanded, so did wine culture. The Silk Road, that network connecting East and West, played a huge role.
So while they were trading silk and spices, they were also spreading wine knowledge.
They were. It was a cultural exchange that really shaped things. Wine traveled eastward, encountered different climates, soils, traditions, and that led to some unique regional variations.
Hey, imagine.
You know, like the delicate floral wines of Japan, or the robust, spicy wines of Georgia. It's amazing how adaptable wine is.
It's a true global citizen.
Yeah.
But speaking of wine traveling across cultures, we have to talk about cultural appropriation, right?
Yeah, it's a complex issue, and it's important to be sensitive and aware.
Definitely. I mean, the global wine market is like exploded.
Yeah.
So how do we appreciate different traditions without crossing that line?
It's about finding a balance, I think, recognizing where different winemaking styles come from.
Their origin.
Right, but also acknowledging how they've evolved and adapted as they move across borders and culture.
So respecting heritage while recognizing that wine is always changing.
Exactly. Approaching the world of wine with curiosity and humility, celebrating the diversity.
I like that. But let's be real, the world of wine isn't all perfect. There's a darker side too, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Like any industry, there are ethical concerns. We've seen scandals, deceptive labeling, fraudulent claims, even exploitation of workers.
Man, that's disheartening. To hear that something that brings so much pleasure can also have these issues. Like, what kind of deceptive labeling are we talking about?
Sometimes producers might lie about where a wine comes from, trying to pass off a lower quality wine as something more prestigious.
So like selling a fake designer bag.
Pretty much. There have also been cases of wineries lying about the grapes they use or the production method, basically taking advantage of trends or what consumers want.
It's like they're breaking the trust between the producer and the consumer.
Exact. And then the exploitation of worker. It's a real problem. There have been reports of unfair wages, dangerous working conditions, even forced labor in some cases.
It's a good reminder to be conscious consumers, right? To support wineries that are doing things the right way.
Absolutely. Consumers are becoming more aware of these issues and demanding more transparency. That's a good thing.
It is. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. History, science, culture, even the not so great parts of the wine world. But let's not forget the reason we all love wine in the first place, the pure enjoyment. So, any tips for picking and pairing wine?
Well, start with what you like. What flavors do you enjoy? Red, white, rosé?
I'm a red wine guy myself. I love those big, bold flavors. But there are so many options. How do I pick the right red for, like, a specific meal?
That's where food pairing comes in. What are you serving? A lighter red, like a Pinot Noir, goes great with lighter dishes. A full-bodied Cabernet, that pairs well with heartier meats, cheeses.
So it's about matching the intensity of the flavor.
It's about finding harmony, creating a balance, and don't be afraid to experiment. There are no strict rules when it comes to pairing. Sometimes the best combinations are the most unexpected ones.
Good to know. I usually stick to the classics, but maybe I need to branch out a bit. What about all those fancy terms on wine lists, like tannins, acidity? What do those even mean?
Those terms describe the structure of the wine, how it tastes, how it feels in your mouth.
Okay, I'm listening. What are tannins?
Tannins are these compounds found in grape skins, stems, seed. They give red wines that dryness, that structure. You feel them as a puckering sensation on your tongue, kind of like after you drink black tea.
So that's what makes my mouth feel dry after a sip of Cabernet.
Exactly. And acidity refers to the tartness of the wine, provides balance and freshness.
Okay, tannins for structure, acidity for balance. Got it. What about sweet? I know some wines are dry, some are sweet.
The sweetness level can vary a lot. It depends on the style of the wine and how much sugar's left after fermentation.
So dessert wines are usually sweeter, right?
Yeah, to complement the sweetness of the dessert. But even dry wines can have a touch of sweetness. It all depends on the grape and how it's made.
Got it. Okay. I'm starting to feel like I can speak wine. But what about tasting wine like a pro? I see people swirling their glasses, sniffing the wine. What am I supposed to be looking for?
Tasting wine is all about using your senses. Sight, smell, and taste. It's about slowing down, paying attention, enjoying all the subtle details.
So it's more than just drinking it.
It is. First, look at the wine. Hold it up to the light and notice the color, the clarity. Is it ruby red, pale yellow, salmon pink? The color can tell you about the wine's age, the grape, even how full-bodied it is.
So deeper color usually means a fuller-bodied wine.
Usually, but not always. Then swirl the wine in your glass.
Ah, the swirly.
This releases the aroma. Take your time, smell the wine. What do you notice?
I always feel a little awkward doing that, but I know it's important. What kind of smell should I be looking for?
Wine aromas are incredibly diverse. You might find fruity notes, floral scents, spicy aromas, earthy undertones, even mineral hints.
Like blackberries, citrus, vanilla?
Yeah, tobacco, leather, all sorts of things. It's like a sensory adventure.
I like that. And then finally you take a sip.
Right. Let the wine coat your palate. Think about the taste, the texture, the finish. Is it dry, sweet, smooth, tannic? Does the flavor linger or disappear quickly?
So much to think about. What about those professional wine tasting events? Are they worth going to?
Definitely. They're great for trying new wines, expanding your palate, and learning from the expert.
And you get to meet other wine lovers.
Exact. It's a fun way to spend an afternoon.
But what about the etiquette? Is there anything I should know before I go?
Just be respectful, of the wines and the people pouring them. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but be mindful of others who are waiting.
What about spitting out the wine? I've seen people do that, but it seems kind of rude.
It's actually good etiquette to spit at tastings, especially if you're trying a lot of different wines.
Oh.
It keeps you from getting too tipsy, and it helps you appreciate each wine without your palate getting overwhelmed.
Makes sense. I'll try to remember that. Okay, but speaking of wine experiences, I've always wanted to go on a wine tour. Any tips for planning a good one?
First, think about what region interests you. Do you want to see the Tuscan hills, the Napa Valley vineyards, the French chateau?
I've always been curious about South American wines.
Yeah.
Like Argentina's Malbec, Chile's Carmenere.
Great choice. South America is a rising star in the wine world. Lots of diversity there. Once you've picked your destination, do your research, book accommodations, especially if you're traveling during peak season. And maybe think about hiring a local guide or joining a tour.
Advice. And what about visiting the winery?
Call ahead to schedule a tasting, especially if you want to try specific wines or learn about their process. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Winemakers love talking about their craft.
I bet they do. Okay, I'm definitely feeling inspired to plan a wine trip.
Remember, wine tourism is more than just the wine itself. It's about experiencing the culture, the history, the traditions of the region. It's about appreciating the art that goes into every bottle.
It's like a journey for your taste buds and your soul.
Exact. And that's what wine mastery is all about. Going beyond the basics and really embracing everything this amazing drink has to offer.
Yeah, it really is. It's a journey. And speaking of journeys, we've talked about the past and the present of wine. But what about the future? What's coming next?
Oh, that's a great question. The wine world is always innovative. There are some really exciting developments happening right now.
What, robot sommelier, vineyards on Mars?
Maybe not that futurist, but there are advancements in precision viticulture, smart irrigation systems, even AI in winemaking.
Wait, AI in winemaking? That sounds like something out of a movie.
It's becoming a reality. Scientists are developing algorithms that can analyze all sorts of data. Soil composition, weather patterns, historical yield.
To help make better decisions about the wine.
Exact. From planting to harvesting, blend. It's like having a supercomputer as your assistant in the vineyard.
So cool. And what about gene editing? I've heard about that.
Gene editing could be huge. Imagine grape varieties that are more resistant to disease, drought, even climate change.
That would be game changing. It would make the industry more resilient.
It has the potential to. But with any new technology, we have to be careful, right? Think about the ethical implications. Make sure these innovations are used responsibly.
I agree. We don't want to lose that human touch, the artistry, the tradition that makes wine so special.
It's all about balance, innovation, and heritage. And that's what I find most fascinating about wine. It connects us to the past, the present, and the future.
I like that.
From ancient rituals to cutting-edge technology, it's been there through it all, reflecting our values, our creativity, our fascination with this drink.
Even something as simple as a glass of wine has so much depth to it.
It does. When you sip that glass, you're not just tasting flavor, you're tasting history, culture, the culmination of human effort.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember about wine?
Be curious, be open-minded. There's always something new to discover. A new grape, a new region, a new way of thinking about wine.
It's a journey of exploration, never ending. And for our listeners who want to continue that journey, definitely check out the book that inspired this whole deep dive, Wine Mastery, Unlocking the Power of Time-Tested Truths.
It's a great read.
It's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Perfect for your next wine adventure.
Absolutely.
So whether you're a wine expert or just starting out, let this be the beginning of your own exploration into this amazing world. Cheers to that.